Hey everyone. Do you like sometimes feel like you're stuck in your own expectations? And do you find that you're sort of always seeking that validation from outside of yourself? Well, if you're ready to sort of get out of your own way and actually go like it, and not need to reach those levels of what we might call perfection, then you're going to want to join us for the show today. So Kamini is going to be here with us. And, she kind of like covers like, how do you find that confidence that comes from the inside out? And what that does is it not only sets the right role model, empower you, but it's also going to empower your children. And by the way, she has 5 of them, so she ought to know. But so we're going to really dig into this today, and you're going to love it. My name is Cheryl Bassett. I'm founder of Unstoppable Connections, international bestseller, and creator of the award-winning Unstoppable Family Meeting Toolkit. I'm also your host for this show, Kitchen Table Conversations, as part of the Edge Network. Families do tap into something I get to share, which are called 4 gifts. And those 4 gifts have everything to do with how you create an unshakable, unbreakable foundation with your family. You can learn more about the 4 gifts and my work for connecting families at unstoppableconnections.com. And if you would like to be on the show or you have an idea for the show, you can also reach out to me at kitchentableconversations.com. Now, I like to set an intention for every show, and I do this because I feel like it's so important to just ground it in really this celebration of the person who's here with us today. This show really is designed to cover the fun stuff to the tough stuff and everything in between, but it's also always, everything's designed to ignite a conversation, to strengthen our families, and to create this positive ripple out into the world. It also does harness one of the gifts that I share, which is the 4th gift, the gift of love. And we unwrap that by choosing to celebrate ourselves and others. And so it's with that intent, that open heart, that open mind that we come today to hear Kamini share her heart, her talents, her expertise, and her passion for what she does. So I'm going to bring her on here in just a second so you can meet her personally. But let me just give you a little bit of her background before I do that. And I'm going to read this because I don't want to get it wrong. But Kamini Wood is the founder and CEO of Live Joy Your Way and the AuthenticMe RiseUp program. She's an international best-selling author and is driven to support both teens and adults who are struggling with that perfectionism thing we're going to talk about today, so they can let go of stress, overwhelm, and the anxiety that often, accompanies that. She's a certified life coach, board certified by the American Association of Drugless Practitioners. She's trained in conscious parenting and conscious uncoupling. Kamini aims to meet her clients where they are. She supports them, guides them on their journey back towards inner confidence, which we're going to talk about today too, energy and empowerment to be themselves both personally and professionally. So with that, let me bring on Kamini. Hey there.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. We're laughing already, guys. If you didn't see our last show, which was it's kind of funny, right? We're doing about being perfect, and our show was not so perfect.
Exactly.
So we got to actually put into work, right? We had to just laugh about it and say, that's okay. We're going to come back and try again. So this is round 2. Going to be amazing. It's going to be exactly perfect as it was meant to be. But we kept getting an audio issue last time, and we got it all resolved and figured out. So anyway, but let's go ahead and start out where we did last time, Kamini, which you kind of like just sharing a little bit about who you are and why you're so passionate about what you do.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I am the mom of 5. So that's number 1 in my life. They are my why. Every single day that I wake up, they are my absolute why of what I do and, just how I proceed with my life. But more in depth, I am a first-generation American. My parents came to the United States when they were teens. I was born and raised in a small town in Connecticut, and growing up with a name like Kamini in a predominantly white town, it stuck out, and it was the first foray from myself in acquiring a false identity of needing to fit in, needing to find a way to prove my value. A story that I share often is, being in elementary school and having substitute teachers come in and knowing that they were going to have to go through the roll call and just sinking down into my chair because I knew when they got to my name, it would be butchered and all the snickers and sneers would start. and it would just be this bright light shining down on how different I was. And so it really, really, that's the false identity that I took on, was that I needed to somehow prove my value and prove that I was a part of everything. And so I started to look outside of myself for that validation. So I took that and carried that through adulthood, and I started realizing that I was, well, truth be told, I didn't really realize it until being a mom, but I was taking on the, I was being defined by the roles I was playing rather than the internal compass, right? So all of that self-worth was being outsourced, if you will. So as I mentioned, being a mom was my catalyst. When I started seeing my own children people please and worry about making others happy to the detriment of themselves, it was this moment of awakening for me, where I realized if I don't shift, if I don't make those transformational changes, this was going to repeat for generations, and it would be carried on for generations. Yep. And so I went through that self-transformation, and I did the evaluation of where did that come from? Where did that false identity start? And almost recognizing my part in playing that role out, and recognizing that I could change that. If I decided to change that and did the work, I could shift. And as I was going through those shifts and those changes, I realized that there are there's lots of people who deal with the same issues that I dealt with the people pleasing, looking externally for validation, looking externally to see if we're meeting those expectations. And I realized that was truly my calling. I was put on that journey. That was my life's journey so that I could now go and help other people and help them shift from this place of false identity of either I don't belong, I'm not enough, I'm not valuable, I'm invisible. Help them shift from that identity into one where they recognize that their uniqueness is the actual gift that this world needs.
Right.
And so I went through the whole certification process, became a certified life coach, went and got specialty certified in things like teen life coaching, conscious uncoupling, all of those things. So for me, it's the life's journey coupled with the education and the training that makes me able to now really serve the people that I work with.
No, that's great. And and you're right. I mean, it's so much about, and that's why I think the stories of why somebody is doing what they're doing and why they're passionate about, right? I mean, the reason that I do what I do is because I can look at my childhood and say it was bat nut crazy and I wanted something different for my children, right? So, so part of this communication thing that I do and why I'm passionate about it is because of the childhood experience. And so how do we break that cycle and do something different? And, sometimes it's about digging in and doing that work. And as someone who completely butchered your name, and then found out how beautiful it was because, well, it was beautiful even in the butchered sense, but is really beautiful when you say it right, because it's kind of like harmony, comedy.
Yeah.
And I had to, so anyway, beautiful name. But I do understand what you're saying about because I definitely did not get it right. So, but yeah, so, all right. So, obviously, we have a lot of things we could really jump into. I know one of the things that you brought up, when you were we were going over some of the questions we wanted to cover was about whether or not what's this difference that happens between being codependent and interdependent, right? And I know that we kind of heard those terminologies before, but how are you applying those in terms of when you're working with people?
Yeah, so I recognized for myself, I became so codependent on those external validations and expectations that when I'm working with people, what I end up seeing is with that codependency, it's the loss of self and the loss of their own identity, where everything is dependent upon somebody else or something else letting them know that they're okay. And it's almost the loss of being able to identify with how you are feeling and and what your needs are. And so the way that I describe the difference between codependence and interdependence is if you think of two circles, for instance, when we're in relationship with somebody and we're codependent, it's as if the two circles are laying on top of each other. There are no distinct areas for each individual circle. They're intertwined completely. So when I'm working with people, it's about moving towards this concept of interdependence, where we can be in relationship with somebody else, where the two circles are intertwined, but not overlapping. So you have the area where they're intertwined, which is the us part of it, but then each circle still has their own individualized area where they have their own identity, where they're able to understand what their own feelings are and what their own needs are. So there's the us, and then there's the individuality, and that's interdependence. And when I'm working with people, it's about moving from this codependent state to this interdependent state so that people are able, perfect, yes, exactly.
Okay.
So that we are able to identify, what it is that we're feeling and what it is that we need, which is so important in the process of being able to get out of this funk and this, cycle of constantly looking for that validation outside of us. Like I mentioned before, outsourcing the self-worth. It's all about, being able to source it from within. And when we're codependent, we cannot identify what it is that we're feeling and what it is that we're needing, because we're always looking to something outside of ourselves to give us that information.
Right. It's interesting because I always say I can say whatever I want about my parents as long as I bless their heart while I do it. And I mean, everybody just does the best that they can, and everybody's perfect in their journey, I always say. But at the same time, my dad was definitely one that I felt like no matter what decision I made, it was always like, well, you should have done this, or you should have done that, or did you think about this, or you could have done that. And I grew up in this space of always looking for that. So I know exactly that validation. And, and like really freeing moment for me was one day I was like worried, like my husband got quiet. And I'm like, well, I'm sitting there and I'm going, gosh, did I do this or did I do that? Or should I have done this or should I have not done that? And, I was like going to all these gyrations, like stressing myself out. Right. And finally I looked at him, I said, you seem upset. Is it something I did? And his comment was, everything is not about you. And it was like a really freeing moment. And then just starting that path of realizing, you know what, a decision's just a decision. It doesn't have to be judged right or wrong. And it doesn't really, like, how do I feel about it? Right?
Exactly. Yep, exactly. And I think what happens when we are constantly looking outside of ourselves, we also end up comparing ourselves. That's just where you end up going is, oh, well, this person did it this way, so then I should. And as parents, I think we do that, especially as a new parent. I know that I used to get caught up in they seem to be doing it this way, so maybe that's the right way to do it. And so when you can actually recenter and recognize that all of that can be self-sourced, you get out of that sort of spiral of comparison mode, because that's where all the shoulds lie, right? I should have done it this way. I ought to have done it that way. And the judgment really sinks in then.
Instead of just trusting, right?
Exactly.
And so, perfect. So I know that the next thing that you kind of roll into is like, what is self-compassion?
Yeah. So when dealing and learning how to move from this place of looking externally to really being able to source that from within, it's so important to be able to practice self-compassion. So often we hear about self-esteem and self-confidence, which are wonderful things. I'm not ever discounting them, but the actual concept of practicing self-compassion and realizing that we are spiritual beings having this human experience, that we are doing the best we can with the information that we have at any given time, it is so important, because as we're learning to self-source our worth, when something doesn't go the way that we wanted it to go or that we expected it to go, instead of ending up spiraling into the judgment mode, we're able to speak to ourselves with kindness and being loving to ourselves and saying, you know what, that didn't go the way that it was supposed to, but this is what I learned, and this is what I can use moving forward and apply moving forward. Self-compassion also recognizes that we don't always have to go it alone. We don't have to be in isolation. When we are feeling overwhelmed, or we're feeling stressed out about a situation and we're not really sure how to maneuver, we can recognize that we're not isolated and that there are other people who have had similar experiences, and it's okay to reach out for that support. That we don't have to constantly think that we have to put on the brave face because, oh my goodness, people will think negatively of us. Instead, recognize the strength and vulnerability, recognize that we have a support system there for a reason, and reach out and just seek the support that we need to help us get to the next step of whatever it is that we're going through. And then, of course, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I would think like you're having your children also witness that you're willing to do that, like it's such a beautiful example to set. Like it's okay to.
And it's so, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I know with my kids, type A kids, and they get it honestly, it's been such a huge shift for them to see me willing to ask for support, because now they're willing to ask for support. They recognize that first of all, it's okay not to get everything right, that it's about learning the concepts and whatnot and applying it and moving it forward. But it's also, there's no harm in seeking assistance. So gone are the days where, oh my gosh, I don't want to get a tutor, for instance, right? Okay, that would be embarrassing. Instead, they're so willing to say, you know what, a tutor would be helpful here, because it doesn't say anything about me as a person or my capabilities. It just says that I need a little extra support. And that's been a huge shift in our house. Because again, 2-3 years ago wasn't necessarily the case, but now it is. And I find that as they grow up into adults, if they can recognize that it's okay to ask for support, they'll actually be in a stronger position rather than always trying to go it alone. And so then the third concept, or the third prong of self-compassion, is just really trying to practice mindfulness and being present in our moment. So often we are either living in the past or we're future forward thinking and constantly thinking about the future. And it's really getting present in our, like, where we are and actually living in the moment. And the best way that I am able to help my clients, for instance, try to practice that is really tuning into their 5 senses. When we slow down enough to tune into what our 5 senses are experiencing, that's when we're able to really be present in the current moment, rather than our monkey mind thinking about something that happened in the past or what's going to happen, an hour or 2 hours later.
And you're right, and you just and appreciating each moment for what it is, right, and that gratefulness. So I would assume a lot of these things, right? So I'm just curious, because you do have 5 kids, and I have 2 sons and I have 2 stepdaughters, and they're all different, right? And I didn't really raise the stepdaughters; they were older by the time I came into this marriage, but my 2 boys are completely like night and day. I'm just curious, with 5 of them, like, do you see that perfectionism in some of them, that that some of these things you're doing have really helped them to sort of let go of that, and
Oh, definitely, yeah. Well, very true point that they're all so different, and that's why I always say, especially when dealing with parents, is you're not going to raise your children exactly the same, because each child is different and will react to you differently. But I have noticed, especially with my children who really are type A and have very perfectionist tendencies, that being able to really practice this concept of self-compassion has toned it down, and that inner critic can be stifling and can actually paralyze us from moving forward, because what happens with the inner critic is we then create fear based around trying things that we're not totally sure that we can accomplish. And so then, of course, we're stifling our growth, because the growth is always right beyond the comfort zone. And so, especially with my children who are that perfectionist personality, this has been a huge shift for them, because they're able to recognize, again, as something doesn't go the way it's supposed to go, or the mistake is made, instead of calling it a mistake, it's, okay, this is what I learned. How do I move forward? And so even in our household, for instance, we never talk about the grade on, I shouldn't say never. We very rarely talk about the actual grade that a child got on a project or a test. It's always, what did you learn? And that's usually the first question I go to, is what did you learn through that project, or what did you learn through that exam? Because it recenters and it reframes where the focus is, that it's not about a number. It's about actually taking what we're learning and applying it moving forward, because again, life's just a journey.
Yeah, my oldest son is very much a perfectionist. Likes he likes structure, likes to be perfect. And I remember, never forget one day him coming home from a test, and I said, how was your test today? And he said, oh, I got 3 wrong. And I'm like, okay, but how many did you get right? Well, I got 22 right. Well, you know what? I'll take that over the flip of that, right? And it is a lot of times just reframing it, and but he definitely had that tendency. He wanted that perfect all the time, and he's learned, those are our opportunities to grow.
The other thing that I've done with my children too is, when I hear them being so negative and down on themselves, sort of slowing them down and asking a question of, would they talk to their friend? Would they talk to their friend with that tone, or would they say that to their friend? Because with us as humans, it's a lot easier to be compassionate to others. We forget to offer that same compassion to ourselves. And so when we put it in that perspective, especially with our children, and ask them, hey, would you say that to your best friend? They're able to realize, okay, that wasn't very nice.
Yeah.
And then and then asking them to reframe what they just said or say it again in a more loving manner. It's exactly to what you just said. How many did you get right? Would you say to your friend, you got 3 wrong? Or would you say, wow, you did really well. You got 22 right. And yeah.
There's the expression, to err is human, to forgive is divine. I always say that, but I always add on to it and say, to err is human, to forgive is divine, ... especially ourselves. And, right. And I think sometimes we're so hard on ourselves, right. And especially people who probably fall into that high achieving type of,
So. Exactly. I was just in conversation with somebody this morning, a client this morning, and she was really down on herself for not accomplishing certain tasks that she had set out for herself. And so we were talking about, well, how can we look at this differently? And instead of maybe writing down, a list of things that we wanted to get done during the day and then focusing on what she didn't get done, it's about, at the end of the day, writing down what she did do during the day. And it really becomes celebrating the things that did get done. Rather than constantly focusing on, oh, well, I didn't get 5 things on my list done. See, there I am going and being a lazy person again. And instead it's, wow, I got 20 things done today. Look at me. Look at all that I accomplished.
I mean, it's one thing if you only have 3 things on your to-do list, but I usually have 25 anyway, right? I mean, so and if I do only have 3, it's because they're really big things that don't happen anyway. So I think
exactly.
Granting grace. Let's grant some grace.
Exactly.
It's actually really important. So, and then what is this like? How do you work with people to kind of move from needing that external to actually looking into that internal validation of ourselves, really?
Yeah. Well, truth be told, the very first step is, and I always say this, is awareness is that doorway to change. And then it's really that decision on your part to say, I'm ready to change. And so when we become aware and we make that decision and we're ready to walk through that doorway, it's then starting to relearn how to identify with ourselves. And it really goes down to recognizing and really honing in on what our core gifts are and what our core values are. Because if we anchor into those, that's when we know that we're self-sourcing. We're not looking outside of ourselves. And then from there, once we identify those things, it's really getting into a new pattern and practice of checking in with ourselves of what we're feeling in a given moment, what we're needing, and then learning this concept of compassionate communication, where we can then request of other people and of ourselves what it is that we might need in order to meet the needs that we have. Because what happens when we are so used to outsourcing our self-worth or looking outside of ourselves for that validation, we lose track. We lose track of who we are, what we need, what we feel, and we also lose the ability to communicate effectively with others and make requests of them. It's not about demanding, it's about requesting and seeing if other people can meet those requests. And of course, if they can't, hopefully we've learned how to compassionately communicate in such a way that they're able to maybe communicate back to us, well, I can't do that specifically, but I can do this instead. And that's where compromise comes into play.
Right.
But it's only when we're coming from a place of really recognizing our own self-worth and that wholeness and, WHOLE,
right.
And we're fully aware of our own value, that we're able to then enter into these relationships with a healthier dynamic at play.
Yeah. And one of the things you just mentioned, which I think most people don't think about, but really it was so powerful for me to do. It was just like, what really are my core values? Because when you know what that is, like what's really, then it's so much easier to, like, when you make a decision, you don't have to second guess it because you know whether or not it's in alignment with those core values. So do you have a process that you work with people to help them kind of uncover those?
Yeah, actually, it's how we usually start a lot of the coaching is based on really uncovering and unveiling what those are. And on that point, I will say I was actually working with somebody recently, and she kept coming back to this concept of, well, society behaves in a certain way. Society behaves in a certain way. And so we really just kept bringing her back and saying, well, what are your core values? How do you want to show up in this world? What do you believe of yourself? And when she was able to keep coming back to that, she's like, oh, I don't have to go with how society behaves. It's all about what feels good to me. And that's the whole process of, self-sourcing rather than looking externally.
Yeah. And I think too, like, obviously whatever we focus and give energy to, we strengthen. So for me, it's a bit, if I really know what my core values are, then I can look at, for me, what's going crazy in the world and go, you know what, I want to show up differently. I want to be part of that solution. I want to step into the energy of that solution. And so because I'm so grounded in knowing what is important to me, because I think how we treat each other and talk to each other and, how we respect one another is it's my, probably my deepest core value. And yet it doesn't mean that I'm judging somebody who else has a different core value. Like it's not good, bad, or whatever. I just know for me at the end of the day, world peace.
Right, exactly. Well, and it goes back to each of us has our own autonomy, and we just need to recognize that we need to. And it's so interesting because I've heard people say, "Well, isn't that selfish?" And is it selfish to let other people be in charge of themselves? Is really what that question comes down to. And it's not. It's we need to have our own autonomy, and so do they. So to your point, you're not judging other people if they don't have the same value system as you, but what's important is that you honor your value system.
Yes.
And that's where you operate from.
Right. Yeah. And then I think probably obviously being able to help your children to understand that's why there's a beautiful quote, and I might have shared this before, maybe with you, but I think we talked about it maybe, but children are not meant to be molded, but unfolded. And I think if you really want to unfold them in a way that allows them to step into the best version, right, of who they're meant to be, it's by helping them to understand who they are and their core values. So.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so interesting because I also hear parents talk about how they want to make their children happy. And it's recognizing that we don't, it's not our job to make them happy. It's our job to give them all of the tools so that they can define happiness for themselves.
Right.
And so when we enable them to find their core gifts and their core values, they're able to then have that map for themselves of what's going to make them happy.
Yeah. So, beautiful. I love that. Yeah. That's really, really huge when you think about it. And so, obviously anybody that's watching the show or listening to the show, I mean, really digging into some of these things. And I know that Kamini, I know this is the work you do, right, is to help people discover this. So I would just encourage everyone to, I'm going to go ahead and throw up here on the screen, but I'm going to say it too, because for those of you who might be listening, so it's KaminiWood.com, KAMINI Wood, WOOD, no S on the end, because I already did that too. KaminiWood.com. And that's her website, and you can definitely reach out to her and check out more of what she's doing. One of the things that we love to do on when we close out these shows, and it's funny because I feel like some like the best nuggets that have already been shared, but sometimes just reinforcing one of those, or maybe something else that you really wanted to share. But we do what we call a DOT, which is a drop of thought. Okay. And I like it to be more spontaneous because it's not about getting it perfect. It's not about getting it perfect. I'm telling you. Okay. It's just about what's really, so if it's just like a pearl of wisdom, basically. If you were going to leave that with the audience, what would that be for you?
My pearl of wisdom would be to really, when we are learning how to self-source our worth, it is so important to just, and I've mentioned this before, but it's recognize that life is a journey that we're going through. It's not happening to us. And when we can really anchor into that thought, we recognize that everything that's occurring in our life is teaching us something. And that really does help get out of the inner critic mode and into this idea and recognition that there is no such thing as perfect. It's all about evolution and self-growth.
Yeah, I love that. There is you made me think of that, and I think life is not happening to us, it's happening for us, right? Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what you're saying. I love that. And it's so very true. So anyway, your message is beautiful.
Thank you.
And so are you.
Thank you.
And I was really just like thrilled to have you come on. I know you're going to be doing some more things with us even in, I'm going to throw this up real quick too. The Family Connection Challenge. Kamini is in there too. If you guys want to come over, forget the dot. I got to get rid of that. Let me just okay, I'm going to be a perfectionist right now. And I'm going to fix this because I did this on the last show too. So it's just time to get there is no .com on the end of that. So there you go. Now it's facebook.com/family connection challenge. I don't know why I put the .com. So now it's perfect.
It's so funny. I'm sitting here going, I do that all the time. I always have 2.coms.
So anyway, but join us because we're going to be doing some challenges in there with Kamini and some other things. There's so much fun stuff going on in there. And so we'd love to have you come and join us. Again, her website is Kamini Wood, Kamini Wood.com. And anyway, just a beautiful message and so important for us to, and for your children, especially between like when they're young, right? Like what are those core beliefs they're developing? So, and so I always leave with this the same dot of that I do because it's just at the heart of what I do. But you know that ripples don't flow in, they flow out. And if we really want to see change out in our world, it's going to start with us, and it starts in our own homes with our own families first and foremost. So from our homes, both of us with 5 kids, she's definitely creating she's creating a bigger ripple than me, just telling you. Anyway, so thanks for being here, and thank you, audience, for joining us. And until next time, we'll see you later. Thanks, Kamini.
Thank you.